In today's class, we are going to discuss about the sources of contamination of meat. Meat gets contaminated at various sources. And what are the sources and how we have to deal with such sources? That's what is the class. The sources of contamination of meat could be categorized like this. Those contaminations that occur from the outer integument of the animal. Here it is the hide of the animal, hair of the animal, fleece and the skin of the animal. That's what is the source. Second is the gastrointestinal tract. Gastrointestinal tract in the sense microorganisms are already present in the GIT of these slaughter animals. Subsequently, they get translocated to the meat. Let it be the edible offal meat or the carcass meat. The next important source of contamination is the contamination that occurs during stunning and sticking process. The physical contact surfaces or the structures to which the carcass or the offal comes in contact with, that also translocates the microorganisms from its surface to the meat of the offal. Operatives are the people who work in the slaughterhouse. They also contaminate the meat. The equipments and other utensils that are used. The slaughter hall in which the animal is processed, the meat animal is processed, that also immensely contributes to the total microbial flora of the meat. Vermin and pest. The vermin and pest are these are unwanted animal or avian species that could contaminate the meat, and they are residing in or around the abattoir. Last is the chemical contamination that occurs due to the usage of the chemicals or other substances for various purposes in the slaughterhouse. So these are all the sources of contamination. These, as the name title indicates, the contamination. The contamination could be broadly categorized into two. One, the physicochemical contamination that occurs due to the dirt, dust, and chemicals. And second is the biological contamination that occurs due to the microorganisms or their products. These are all the sources of contamination. Now, let us discuss the different sources. Okay. So, these contaminants, they come from either the exterior or from the interior. Interior means interior to the animal, that is gut and other things. Okay. Environment, slaughterhouse environment also plays an important role. Let us discuss one by one these various kinds of contaminants. The outer integument of the animal. The slaughter animal has got the covering of the skin. Over that, either there is a hair, there is a fleece, there is a feather, depending on the animal species or the skin. And of course, the animal is raised in some form, and the ecosystem of the farm, when we talk about the microbial diversity, that immensely contributes to the contingent microflora that is present on the surface of the animal. A detailed discussion of this particular topic, you can read the meat hygiene book by Gracie and others. So Colin and Boy, the latest edition you can read, and the same part, the portion I am covering in this class. Okay. The hide and the hair of the slaughtered animal is a major source of bacterial and the yeast contamination. Because these microorganisms, the microflora, when we talk about, mostly it is bacteria and the yeast, they are the inhabitants of the soil where the animal is either it is tied or it is kept as a feedlot animal. Okay. These microorganisms, they get transferred from the soil to the outer integument, which is in the form of a hair or bristle or fleece or feather. Okay, it gets adhered to the outer integument, and later on, the type of the microbiota that we expect in the skin, okay, whether it is a hide or a skin. So it is the natural history. It speaks about the natural history of the animal, how it is maintained. More hygienic the animal, more cleaning process, lesser is the diversity of the microflora. More unhygienic are the conditions during these primary production practices, higher is the diversity of the microorganisms. There are two things associated with microorganisms. One is the diversity of the microorganism, and second thing is the load of the microorganism. Okay. Whenever a knife is introduced for the removal of the pelt or the outer skin and hide, okay. So with this, there is contamination of the knife that occurs, and if it comes in contact with the muscle part, the meat or the offal, that is the carcass meat or the offal, there is likely contamination that occurs from exterior to the interior of the muscle. Okay. In addition to this, there is a contamination that is likely to occur from the hands of the operatives, the legs, and clothing of the operatives. Okay. That is why they should be properly cleaned at the end of the work and dried before they are used next time. The outer integument, there was a survey that was carried out in the Northern Ireland, with respect to the cattle hides. And this study is very old one, 1960s. You can refer Gracie book for this particular reference. Okay. The weight of the manure here it is the dung or the droppings of the animal, that we call it as a manure for an adult cattle. Okay, this is soil-borne contamination that occurs over the animal. They have identified on an average each animal carries about 4 kgs of soil, including manure, over the surface. Okay, this outer integument of the animal carries about 4 kg on an average over its body. The range is in very cleaner animals, it is lesser than 1 kg. And highly dirty animal, it can go up to 16 kg over the animals. Okay. So that much weight when it enters, okay, the soil, including manure, that much weight when it enters the slaughterhouse premise. Okay. In England, it has been studied. It is the highest one, 36 kg. A cattle weighing about 450 or 500 kg, 36 kg dirt over its surface, it carried to the abattoir. You can just imagine a situation. What would be the situation of the drains that carry the waste to the outside? How about the contamination of the slaughter hall? When this much soil, including litter of the animal, that is manure of the animal, enters a slaughterhouse. So it is a major source of contamination to the slaughterhouse. And several studies carried out in the Europe and elsewhere across the world, they all have indicated that this should be as minimal as possible, because it is a potential source of contamination, the outer integument of the animal. Then, when we talk about the prevalence of the important foodborne and zoonotic infections that could be transmitted through such dirt that enters the abattoir through the integument, they have identified E. coli O157, Salmonella species, and Campylobacter species at various levels. It does not mean that if you provide an animal for this to the sent to the slaughterhouse, which is visibly clean, you cannot say that it is free from pathogens. At the same time, you cannot say that the animal which is having a lot of dirt on its body, manure and soil and other dirt adhering to the body, if it enters, you cannot say that that is more likely to carry the zoonotic and foodborne infective agents. You cannot say, there is no relationship between them. But the total microbial load in terms of the number and diversity will be more when it is having more dirt on its body. Okay, it may or may not carry the pathogens, because even comparatively cleaner animals can also carry the zoonotic agents, and more dirtier animals may not carry zoonotic agents. That is why there is no relationship between carriage of foodborne and zoonotic agents and the quantum of the dirt that enters the abattoir through these dirty animals or the integument. Again, even though the study that I talked about here in Europe and UK, okay, described way back in 1960s, even today the practice has lot many changes occurred, okay, with respect to the processing, with respect to the information about the food chain that we acquire and we intend to implement food safety management systems. But it is the status of the animals entering the slaughterhouse as clean as possible has not changed. In other words, these animals over the decades, the dirty animals, even today, they enter the slaughterhouse and they contaminate the premise and the slaughter hall environment. Okay, and you cannot make animal sterile. You cannot make the animal sterile, because when it is a live animal that enters the abattoir, so it is likely to defecate, likely to pass the feces. So that itself is a source of contamination. You cannot make it zero, but attempts should be made to reduce as less as the quantum of this litter to as minimal as possible. That is why we have to have the hygienic practices, and we need to focus on achieving as much as hygiene as possible. Okay, it is not perfectly possible because animal is bound to pass urine and feces. Okay, so whenever animals are raised in the farm, we should follow as much hygienic practices as possible. When these animals are transported in the vehicles to the abattoir, the transportation conditions should be as hygienic as possible. When these animals are traded in the market, okay, they should be traded in as clean or as hygienic practices as possible. And when these animals, after purchasing from the markets or from the farms, when they are maintained in the lairage, the conditions must be kept as hygienic as possible. Because as I told you, absolute hygiene is not possible because it is a living animal and it is bound to get soiled. Okay. One more study that was carried out in Finland. Okay. What to do with these excessively dirty animals? Okay. There should be some mechanism, no, to control that one. If you stress the suppliers that don't supply any dirty animal at all, probably the supply may cease. Okay, because attaining the hygiene or cleanness is a costly affair and it requires a lot of proactive approaches. And the suppliers, if you live like that, If you live like that without taking any precautions, they will again supply excessively dirty animals. Okay. If you insist too much hygiene, then there may not be supply of the stock. So somewhere you have to bring the balance between these two things so that there is continued supply, at the same time clean and hygienic conditions are maintained. So what they did in Finland, they imposed a series of rules by taking all these people, stakeholders, whom we call it as, into confidence. Okay, when dealing with the excessively dirty animal, okay, they formed the rules, and these rules were agreed by all the people. Who are the people? The people are the farmers who supply these animals, the traders, and the inspection veterinarians. Okay, all of them they agreed, and various industries were also involved in this, meat industry and the leather industry, because we are talking about the hide and skin, and the state veterinary department, the government, the farmers, the abattoir veterinarians, the industry people, meat industry and leather industry people, they all had a brainstorming session, and they phrased a series of rules to take care of dirty animal, excessively dirty cattle animal. Okay, they formulated an agreement. If at all the farmers and the vendors have to supply the animals, they have to sign this agreement. Okay, what is the statement here in this rule? What is the rule? It is self-made rule. If the animals are excessively dirty, such animals could be detained. They are not slaughtered immediately. Okay, they are detained, and these dirty animals will be slaughtered at the end of the slaughter process, and after that the slaughterhouse premise will be cleaned properly, and whatever the spending that occurs to clean such dirty animals and the premise of the slaughterhouse, that extra cost has to be borne by those suppliers who have supplied excessively dirty animal to the slaughterhouse. By imposing such mutually agreed rules in Finland, they could decrease the supply of the dirty animals by 85%. Okay, so it is a mutually agreed consensus between all the stakeholders of the meat production chain. Okay, starting from farmers, the vendors, the traders, the abattoir people, abattoir management, the meat industry, the leather industry, the veterinary department, and the inspection veterinarians. All of them involved in this one approach, and the Finland decreased the supply of the dirty animals, excessively dirty animals, by 85%. Okay, 15% were still not attainable. They were because of certain unforeseen contamination that used to occur in the supply of the livestock. Likewise, in the United Kingdom, what they did, over the years, they passed certain legislations. Okay, they introduced something known as clean livestock policy, wherein the suppliers were expected to supply only the clean livestock. Okay, that's a policy. If they supply the dirty animals, there was penalty measures. Okay, and in the year 2006, they revised their European food hygiene legislation. In that also, they laid stress on the supply of the clean livestock to the slaughterhouse. Okay, they set up certain hygiene criteria, wherein there was a regulation on the microbial load on these animals. There was a documentation mechanism and documentation verification mechanism by an independent authority. Okay, not the same authority, independent authority, who often used to have the surprise visits, the planned and unplanned visits to the plant, and checking of the quality of these animals with respect to cleanliness when we talk about the outer integument. Likewise, other aspects. The second important source of contamination of the meat it is the gastrointestinal tract. The earlier integument was exterior to the animal, and this gastrointestinal tract is internal to the animal, interior to the animal. Okay, and as long as you are very hygienic in removing the gastrointestinal tract, so long no contamination of the carcass or the offal is expected. Okay, if there is any deviation in such practice, so that would lead to the transfer of the microorganisms which are present in the stomach and the intestine and some organs to the carcass of the edible offal. Okay, the contamination here occurs when there is whenever there is an accidental puncture to the stomach or intestine, or spillage from the rectum or the esophagus. Rectum is the posterior end of the GIT, esophagus is the anterior, because mouth and other things have been cut now. Head has been removed, that's why esophagus. That is why there is a bunging process. Bunging, okay. This bunging process, it is nothing but tying the knot to the anterior and posterior end of this GIT, so that the contents are not spilled over to the carcass. Okay, that's what is the process to avoid this spillage. That's one of the practice that is practiced in the slaughterhouse. But you just remember, I talked some classes before that animal has to be fasted, should not be provided any feed 12 hours prior to the slaughter, but ample quantity of water should be provided. One of the reason is to avoid this accidental puncture of the stomach and the intestine. If the stomach and intestine is more engorged with the content, even if a small touch that occurs with a sharp knife, it would lead to the piercing and puncture, leading to the leakage of the contents to the carcass from the intestine or the stomach. Okay, so if the content of the stomach and intestine is reduced considerably by fasting the animal, pre-slaughter fasting the animal, so such punctures could be avoided. One thing is punctures should be avoided. As much the punctures are avoided as possible, so much the contamination could be avoided. That's one way. Okay. Second way is making the stomach and intestine less turgid, so that that would lessen the chances of leakage. That is the second aspect associated with the pre-slaughter fasting of the animal and reduction in the contamination. On an average, the microflora, mixed microflora, various species of microorganisms, most importantly bacteria, that is around 10 raised to 10 colony units per gram of the intestinal content. When even if 1 gram of the gastrointestinal content is transferred from the GIT to the meat, you can just imagine how much microbial load is inoculated into the meat. Okay. The rupture of the stomach and intestine, sometimes due to certain pathological conditions that occur in the animals. Say, for example, peritonitis in the pig. You know what is peritonitis? There is a infectious peritonitis in the pig. Okay. Under such circumstances, it is likely to add more microbial content to the meat. If a cattle is suffering from traumatic reticuloperitonitis, pericarditis, okay, peritonitis or pericarditis or reticulitis. Under such circumstances, already there is a pyogenic lesion that is present in the cattle. So that is, and if at all some ruptures that occur due to these pathological conditions, that is more likely to contaminate the meat. Especially when young lambs are young sheep, that the lambs are slaughtered and they are suffering from the navel abscess. So that's also likely to contaminate the meat. So what I mean to say here is, whenever certain pathological conditions are occurring in the carcass, in the animal, there is more likely chance of translocation of these microorganisms from the lesion to the meat. Okay, and whenever that occurs, so obviously the more contamination means more likely to affect the public health. That is why hygiene and sanitation, when we talk about all these factors, we have to keep in mind. Whenever the animals are transported, okay, the organisms such as salmonella, even if some animals are carriers, if all the infected animals and non-infected animals, when they are transported in the same vehicle, the external contamination that occurs due to the GIT transmission of these organisms such as salmonella would potentially affect the public. Okay, so that is why the hygiene and sanitation principles must be scrupulously followed during the transportation of these animals. We call it as cross contamination. Okay, cross contamination, it is more likely to occur when infected animals are transported with the healthy animals. Next important source is the stunning and sticking process. Stunning, making animal unconscious, and sticking means it is a process of cutting the skin. Okay, sticking and bleeding are two important processes. Sticking means cutting the exterior skin, and bleeding means cutting, severing the blood vessels. That's what is the bleeding. So during stunning process, especially when the animals are stunned by captive bolt stunning method, if hygienic measures are not followed, it is likely to contaminate the carcass. Okay, the stunning process. Likewise, the sticking process. Sticking process means making the animal to bleed. Bleeding also we call it as exsanguination, also we call it as. It is a two-step process. Number one, the sticking process, wherein the external skin is cut. Second is the bleeding process, wherein blood vessels are cut. This process is accomplished in the modern slaughterhouses using two-knife technique. Two-knife technique means you use a dedicated knife for external cutting of the skin. Okay, remove it, sanitize, then you use it for next animal. That's all the process. You use one more knife. Now the skin has been cut. Okay, spear cut has been made through the skin, and now the blood vessels have been exposed. Now you use the second knife, bleeding knife, to sever the blood vessels such as jugular vein, anterior vena cava, and others. Okay, when you cut this with the second knife, you have avoided introduction of the contaminants, okay, from the exterior of the skin to the interior of the animal, that we call it as the carcass meat now. Okay, this is now, this practice, two knife technique is a routine practice that is practiced in all the slaughterhouses across the world. Okay, so hygiene and sanitation are very important to avoid the contamination at the stunning point and also during sticking process. The next important source of contamination is the physical contact with the structures. We handle the animal, okay, in a slaughterhouse, and we transform that meat animal into meat. Okay, this is accomplished by the people and the devices that we use. We cannot cut the bone with hands. Okay, we require knife, we require saw, we require carcass splitter, and we require overhead rail, we require hooks, gambrels, we require trays to carry the organs, to collect blood, etc. Okay, so the meat and the offal, edible offal, comes in contact with the physical surfaces. Okay, the hygiene and sanitation of these physical surfaces has a direct bearing on the microbial biodiversity and count in the carcass meat. That is why hygiene and sanitation has to be followed. Design of the line must be very important. It has to be meticulously planned. There should not be connections between the clean and unclean area of the slaughterhouse, especially when we talk about a tripary or a guttery, where guts and organs or intestines are handled. There should be a functional separation. Even the air movement should be from clean to unclean area. It should never be reversed. The water supply, the air supply, the personal movement, if at all it is there, okay, there should not be personal movement, but if at all it is there, they all should be from clean to unclean area, never in the reverse direction. Okay, and we have to keep all these physical contact surfaces wherein the edible offal or the carcass meat comes in contact. They all should be kept under hygiene and sanitation conditions. Okay. The weak points in the slaughterhouse, they include these GIT handling areas. Let it be the gut table or the chutes or the conveyors. They are the weak points. They require utmost attention to minimize the contamination of the carcass meat. The gross cleaning in the sense cleaning process in the slaughterhouse, that is mostly accomplished using the squeezes or the shovels. They must be done throughout the process of slaughter. Otherwise, there is the build-up of the blood, clot, and other debris, okay, at the location, and that would, in due course of time, would lead to the proliferation of the microorganisms there. So, when we talk about the gross cleaning of the premise and the surface, it should be an ongoing process. Especially, its effectiveness can be enhanced during the breaks. Break in the sense, for example, there is a 2-hour operation followed by 20 minutes or half an hour break, because operators know these people cannot work that much. They get strains, sprains. That's why rest is given. They can go to washroom and all. During these breaks, when the line is no more operating, when no more work is going on, under such circumstances, it is very easy to achieve the hygiene and sanitation. That's why during these breaks, okay, the breaks, there should be cleaning process. Okay. Then positioning of the heights, the heights of these rails, the overhead rail system, wherein the carcass and offal is carried. Most of these times, attention is paid towards only the carcass. The edible offal portion is neglected. If such carcass drags on the floor or touches constantly the surface, it can act as a potential source of contamination or cross-contamination. Okay, such the swinging type of establishments should be swinging in the sense there is no control over that. It swings just like a swing. Okay, so they should be avoided. They should be made as fixed as possible, and you should see that offals and all, they don't touch the surfaces when they are carried over the overhead rail system. Okay. The operatives means the people who work in the slaughterhouse, and without whom there cannot be processing. That's why the people are one of the most mobile elements in the slaughterhouse, because once it is a slaughter line, a rail cannot be changed. Okay, rail is having a fixed movement. Water is having fixed movement. Air also you can make it to move unidirectionally. But these mobile elements, okay, the people who move from one section to the other section of the slaughterhouse, if they move from dirty area to the clean area, they contaminate the clean area. There can be cross contamination by these people. That's why the persons or the operatives are the major source of, one of the major source of contamination of the meat in the slaughterhouse. That is why strict norms should be placed. These people must be educated, trained, retrained, okay, with respect to their PPEs, with respect to their hygiene, personal hygiene, with respect to the movement within the slaughterhouse, with respect to use of the devices, appliances, knives, machines, and other kinds of the instruments there in the slaughterhouse. They should be properly trained. Okay. One thing, if they do not know that, one thing they will hurt themselves. Even it can lead to fatalities. Second thing, they will contaminate potentially the product. That's why these operatives who work in this slaughterhouse, they must get the adequate training, retraining, reminding again and again, and ensuring that they implement the basic principles of food hygiene. Okay, you just remember what happened to that typhoid Mary. Okay, typhoid Mary. Okay, wherever she went, she all infected. So after toilets, whenever they use the toilet, how to wash their hand. During work, whenever there are natural reactions of the body, whenever they sneeze, they cough, they need to clean their eyes and all. What kind of precautions they have to take? And how they can achieve these natural reflexes, okay, without compromising the slaughterhouse hygiene. So they must be properly taught to these operatives. However, there are certain people who still move between the different sections of the slaughterhouse. Number one is the social visits. Okay, a spouse is working in the abattoir and other person has come to meet, social visit. Managers has to see whether they are working, the slaughterhouse workers are working properly or not. Quality control staff, they have to come and see whether proper temperature is attained or not, whether particular machine is working or not. Engineers to repair, maintain the line, okay, the engines, the fittings, all these drainages, they are working properly or not. If at all there is any problem, they need to bring certain fitters, and these operatives, they have to work and correct the problem. So these are all unavoidable. Okay, whenever they make a movement, entrance to the different section of the slaughterhouse, how they have to come and how they have to exit, and from which place they have to enter and which place they have to exit, all these things have to be properly trained as a part of good manufacturing practice or as a part of good hygienic practices. In Europe, there is a staff training program. No training, no work. No training, no FSMS. Okay, that's what is the thing. The official veterinarian is held responsible for all these hygiene related things. The veterinarian, by virtue of his degree, since they have studied veterinary public health course, okay, they need to inculcate all these principles in the slaughterhouse. The responsibility lies with them. Okay, whether you are a BVSC, whether you are a DVM, veterinary public health is taught across the world. Okay, so since it has been taught to them, they must implement all these principles of hygiene and sanitation so that the public health safety is ensured. Equipment and utensils. Equipment and utensils include all these goods contact surface. Okay, at times what happens in the slaughterhouse, they apply certain oil and grease so that the overhead rails are easily they move. Okay, this oil or the grease that they apply, it should be of food grade. If a normal what we use in the other automobiles, if they use these things here, what will happen? It is going to contaminate. It is a chemical contamination of the meat that occurs because there can be spillage. Okay, there can be spillage, accidental one. One thing is that you should ensure that no such spillage occurs of oil and grease or other lubricant. Okay, accidentally, even if it occurs, it should be of food grade. Okay, and all these knives, the hooks, the gambrels, the cutters, the saws, okay, the portioning things, they all the hide pullers, okay, they all should be they properly sanitized, and the hygiene of them should be maintained as much as possible. Otherwise, they will act as potential source of contamination. Next is the slaughter hall environment. In the slaughter hall environment, many times, what happens is if the air is contaminated, if a contaminated water is circulated, if at all there is a opening somewhere in the slaughterhouse that is making that is giving a way that is helping the entry of stray animals, including insects and pests. So the hygiene and sanitation cannot be maintained. So meat potentially gets contaminated. That is why we have to see that no such environmental factors influence the uh, the slaughterhouse. Okay, in the sense contamination. One important aspect that you must understand is the knife sterilizers, because meat means we need to cut. That's why knife sterilizers are very much essential. Different kinds of knives, they are very much essential in the slaughterhouse, and they need to be frequently sanitized. Okay, for that what we do in the slaughterhouse, we keep the knife sterilizers at appropriate positions. Okay, the stunning area, the bleeding area, then the hide and fleece removal, then evisceration, then carcass uh, we deboning area and all. So at all these places there are knife sterilizers. The temperature that is maintained in these knife sterilizers is 82 degrees centigrade. Why not 100? 100, even you can go beyond 100 also. If you keep that much high temperature, there is a rising of the steam. When this steam rises, okay, that gets accumulated there towards the ceiling, and in due course of time that gets condensed, makes small droplets, and these small droplets coalesce together, form bigger drops, and they dribble over the surface of the meat. Then contamination occurs. The microorganisms that were there somewhere adhering to the ceiling have now been transferred to the carcass meat. So to avoid such contaminations, we keep the temperature at 82 degrees centigrade. If you lower the temperature below 80, the microbial inactivation that you intend, that you cannot achieve. That's why 82 degrees centigrade is very critical for these knife sterilizers. However, at many occasions, we use steam for cleaning and other purposes, surface cleaning or floor cleaning purpose. Steam is used. Under such circumstances also, whenever you use the steam, see that there is no condensation of that one at the ceiling, leading to the contamination of the carcass. This again, whenever you handle a steam or a warm water, so the outer external conditions, they influence the condensation and dripping. Okay, obviously you have to manage that environmental control so that such condensation will not occur. Nowadays, compared to the water-based night sterilizers, now the newer technologies of alternate sterilizing systems have come up. They, based on the research and development, they could be opted to avoid such condensations. Water is also important source. Whenever excessively dirty animals enters the slaughter hall, there can be blockage of the drainages and the conduits. And whenever such a conduits are blocked, drainage are blocked, water gets stagnated. And due to the movement of the people or the slaughter operations, there can be splash or spilling of the water to the carcass that would cause the contamination. That's why we have to see that no such contamination occurs due to the water sources. And whenever scalding water is used, okay, so that should be properly used. At some places in the slaughterhouse, these apron washing stations are kept because aprons means all these operators have to wear the aprons. At the end of the work, they wash the apron in that apron washing stations. Hygiene has to be maintained at these places. Okay. At times, what happens, especially when working with a temperate region, due to the cooler environment inside, okay, people tend to keep the doors of that particular section open. That would lead to the entry of the draught from outside. Okay, so we have to see that no such practices are practiced in the slaughterhouse, because opening of the doors of a unit of a particular section would even lead to the introduction of the dirt, dust, the insects, flies, etc. When they enter, they will potentially contaminate the slaughter hall environment. That's why it should be properly closed and monitored. Vermin and pest. Vermin and pest means these are all unwanted animal or avian species. Let it be the stray animals such as dog, cat, the rodents such as rat, bandicoot, mice, okay, birds such as starlings, crows. At some places, if it is seagulls. Okay, these are all the unwanted species of animals and the birds, including insects. Okay, they all need to be kept away from the habitat. Otherwise, there is contamination of the carcass meat that is likely to occur. Okay, and such a this pest control program must be documented and evidence has to be shown to the inspectors. Okay, at times what happens, they keep insectocutors, electrocutor that kills the insects in the habitat. Okay, if you find large number of insects, you can be happy that this insecticide has worked and there is elimination of large number of insects. At the same time, it also speaks about certain attractive type of things there, not having proper mesh, the screen at that particular point, because of which these insects have escaped that insect proofing mechanism and now have entered the hall where the processing is occurring and where you have kept the insectocute. Okay, so there should not be, they should not enter inside. That's what is the precaution that need to be taken. At some places, certain baits are kept. Okay, the quality control of the bait, the safety concerns associated with the bait also need to be evaluated. Okay, so in nutshell, the vermin and pest should be as minimal as possible, because one or two flies you cannot avoid it. Okay, but if there are hundreds and thousands of flies, that is really is unhygienic condition. So we should see that the vermin and pest is kept as less as possible, as low as possible. Finally, a chemical contamination. Chemical contamination of the meat can occur when meat is handled in a surface that has been cleaned with a cleaning chemical and its residue is left on the surface. We have to take utmost care that when the job of that particular chemical is over as a cleansing agent, its residue must not stay on the food surface. It should be cleaned properly, eliminated from the food surface. Okay, then only the meat has to be handled in that. And all that, the lubricating oils, the grease, what I talked about, should be of food grade. Otherwise, chemical contamination occurs if they are of automobile grade. Okay. We cannot use all those hard chemicals that we use in our routine toilets. Okay, there are certain sanitizers that have been approved. Okay, detergents and sanitizers that have been approved to be used in the abattoir. They only should be used. Okay, all things they should not be used. Even if some chemical is used which is approved for usage, its residue should not be there on the food surface when meat is actually handled. So all these precautions we have to take in order to eliminate the contamination that occurs due to the chemicals in the abattoir. How to get rid of the contamination in the slaughterhouse? Okay, just to introduce the headings. How whenever we deal with a dirty animal, okay, it has to be properly dealt with. At some places there is clipping practice on the animal, because if you remove the hair and the wool, the cattle are sick. So if you clip the animal, you can reduce the load. That's the intention. Protecting meat from the worker, the operative hygiene, following good hygienic practices. And you design the layout and the flow lines of the abattoir in such a way that all these contaminations are minimized as much as possible. These are some of the ways to reduce the contamination of the meat. Okay. So in today's class, we discussed the various sources of contamination